Today, we will unfold one of the world's most enigmatic cases, a case that still sends a shiver down the spine whenever it is mentioned, the case of the Axemen of New Orleans. The story begins in the United States during the early years of the 20th century, a period of great turmoil and mystery. This case is ranked among the top 10 most famous criminal cases in the world. Haunting the public with the perpetrator's brutality and audacity, the killer, dubbed the Axeman of New Orleans, spread terror throughout the entire city. He operated at night, stealthily breaking into homes while people were sound asleep. The terrifying part is that he didn't bring his own weapon. Instead, he used tools readily available in the victims' homes, usually an axe, to commit his crimes. After finding a suitable weapon, he would sneak into the bedroom and attack the victims' heads. More cruelly, he would leave the weapon at the scene as a way to challenge the police. Not stopping there, after carrying out a series of horrifying murders, he even sent taunting letters to the police, further enraging the public. Now, let's delve into the setting of our story. The city of New Orleans, Louisiana, is located in the southern United States near the Gulf of Mexico. New Orleans is the state's largest city, famous for its French-inspired architecture, unique cuisine, and vibrant music scene. It is considered one of America's most distinctive cities. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, causing a sharp decline in its population from 790,000 to 370,000, making it the second fastest shrinking city after Detroit. Our story takes place in the 1910s in New Orleans. The city in 1918 was a tapestry of sound and scent, a place where the humid air, thick with the smell of jasmine and decay, carried the distant wail of a jazz trumpet and the clatter of streetcars on iron tracks. It was a city of stark contrasts, of gas-lit alleyways and grand Creole townhouses, of devout churchgoers and voodoo practitioners. Immigrant communities, particularly those from Italy, had carved out their own vibrant neighborhoods, filling the streets with the aromas of baking bread and simmering sauces, their voices a melodic counterpoint to the city's English and French patois. They were grocers, barbers, laborers, families who had crossed an ocean in search of a new life, building small empires of produce and canned goods in the corners of this sprawling, complex city. But beneath the lively facade, a deep-seated tension simmered. And into this humid, breathing city, a shadow was about to fall, a presence that would turn the familiar comforts of home into scenes of unimaginable terror. The first incident occurred in the pre-dawn hours of May 23, 1918, a Thursday. The first to be touched by this darkness was a man named Andrew. 28 years old, it was around 4:30 in the morning, a time when the city was at its quietest, the boisterous energy of the French Quarter having finally succumbed to sleep. Andrew, lying in his bed, was abruptly pulled from his slumber by a sound that cut through the stillness, a pained, guttural cry from the house next door. That house belonged to his brother, Joseph, and his sister-in-law, Catherine. A cold knot of dread tightened in Andrew's stomach. This was not a common city sound. It was something raw, something desperate. Without a second thought, he threw on his clothes, shook another brother awake, and together they raced out into the damp morning air, their footsteps echoing in the empty street. Joseph's house was a modest, single-story building at a street corner, attached to the grocery store and bar he owned and operated. The layout was simple. The store and bar faced the street, two separate spaces with no connecting door. Behind them was the living quarters, a kitchen with a door leading outside, a small bathroom, and the bedroom where Joseph and Catherine slept. Andrew and his brother arrived at the front door. Their frantic knocking met with an unnerving silence. The sounds that had alarmed them had ceased, replaced by an absence of noise that was somehow more frightening. They circled to the back, their hearts pounding in their chests. The rear door was ajar. As they drew closer, they saw it, clear evidence of forced entry. The bottom right panel of the wooden door had been chiseled away, creating an opening just large enough for someone to reach through and undo the latch. Steeling themselves, the two brothers pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air in the small kitchen felt heavy, stagnant. They moved cautiously, calling out Joseph's name, their voices sounding small and hollow in the silent house. They proceeded directly to the bedroom. And there, the world stopped. The scene that confronted them was one of such profound violence that their minds struggled to comprehend it. The room had been transformed into a place of nightmares. It was a tableau of utter devastation. Joseph was on the floor beside the bed, his body contorted, life seemingly draining from him with every shallow breath. Catherine, Andrew's sister-in-law, was on the bed, unnaturally still. The sheer brutality of what had occurred left the brothers frozen in place, a wave of nausea and disbelief washing over them. The air was thick with a coppery, metallic scent that would haunt their memories for the rest of their lives. Breaking free from the paralysis of horror, they stumbled back out of the house, gasping for fresh air, and ran for the nearest police station. Their words tumbled out in a panicked, incoherent stream, but the terror in their eyes was enough. Officers arrived at the scene quickly, but it was too late. Joseph had succumbed to his injuries, his life extinguished in the same room he had shared with his wife. The subsequent investigation revealed the chilling details. The medical examiner determined both victims had suffered extreme trauma to the head, inflicted with a blunt object. The weapon was identified as an axe, but the assailant had used the blunt side, not the sharpened blade, to deliver the devastating blows. Both victims also showed signs of further violence inflicted around their necks. Catherine's injuries were particularly severe. The damage to her person was almost absolute. At the scene, investigators found the axe, a tool belonging to Joseph himself. Now an object of horror, a set of clothes, also marked by the events of the night, was discovered. Nothing of value had been taken. Robbery was clearly not the motive. In the neighbor's yard, officers found a straight razor, stained and discarded, apart from the chiseled-out panel on the back door. There were no other signs of a forced entry. The police began to piece together a terrifying sequence of events. The perpetrator had slipped into the home through the violated back door. Once inside, they located the axe and the razor. They used the axe to overpower Joseph and Catherine, then the razor to inflict further harm. After the assault, the attacker, now covered in the evidence of their actions, apparently changed into a clean set of clothes found at the scene before melting back into the night. The lack of a robbery motive was perplexing. This was not a crime of opportunity or greed. It was an act of pure, unadulterated violence. Suspicion naturally fell on Andrew, the owner of the discarded razor, a barber by trade. He explained that he had brought the razor home from his shop a few days prior to sharpen it and had simply left it there. The police learned that Andrew had recently been drafted to fight in the First World War. He was reportedly terrified of going to the front lines and had been drinking heavily in the days leading up to the attack. On the night of the incident, he admitted to being at a bar until 1 a.m. before returning home, only to be awakened by the noises from his brother's house around 4:30 a.m., lacking a solid alibi and unable to provide a better explanation for the presence of his razor. Andrew was taken into custody. However, days turned into a week, and investigators could find no further evidence linking him to the crime, nor could they establish any plausible motive. Andrew was released, and the case grew colder. During the investigation, a detective noticed a faint message scrawled in chalk on a nearby sidewalk. "Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony." The officers were puzzled. Mrs. Maggio was clearly a reference to Catherine. They dug into old files and discovered a 7-year-old case where an Italian grocer's wife, known to her customers as Mrs. Tony, had been the victim of a similar, though not fatal, assault. The connection seemed tantalizing, a possible link to a past crime. But the old case file was thin, the details sparse, the lead was a dead end, a whisper from the past that offered no real answers. Just as the city's shock over the Maggio case began to subside, the shadow fell again. A month later, at 7:00 in the morning, a delivery truck driver pulled up to another grocery store. It was his regular route. He found it strange that the shop was still shuttered. Normally, it would be bustling with activity by this hour. Knowing the owner lived in an apartment behind the store, the driver walked around to the back to check. He found the rear door unlatched and pushed it open, calling out the owner's name. The sight that greeted him was sickeningly familiar. A man and a woman were on the floor in a state of critical distress. The scene was one of chaos, and it was clear they were both severely injured but still clinging to life. The driver, his mind reeling, turned and fled, making a desperate run for the police station. When the authorities arrived, they found the victims and had them rushed to the hospital. The man had sustained a severe injury to his right temple, resulting in a skull fracture, but miraculously, it was not life-threatening. The woman had been struck on her left arm and had lost consciousness. The assailant had once again used the blunt side of an axe, which likely saved them from immediate death. A search of the premises revealed the attacker's signature, a chiseled-out panel from the back door. Discarded nearby, in the bathroom, they found the weapon, another axe, left behind. Curiously, they also found a letter written in German, Russian, and another, unidentifiable language. Again, no valuables were missing. The parallels to the Maggio case were undeniable. The victims were attacked with an axe. The point of entry was a violated back door, and the two locations were only 4 miles apart. Police were convinced they were dealing with the same perpetrator. The male victim was identified as Louis, a 60-year-old Italian immigrant, and the woman was Anna, his mistress. Investigators soon learned that Louis had recently had a conflict with a former employee, a 41-year-old African-American man named Oben. Oben had argued with Louis and quit his job at the grocery store just a week before the attack. Lacking a concrete alibi, Oben was arrested, but once again, the police could find no physical evidence to connect him to the crime, and he was released a few days later. At the hospital, under careful medical attention, Louis and Anna slowly regained consciousness. Louis told the police that a man had broken in while they were sleeping and attacked them, but it had been too dark to see his face. Anna, however, whose injuries were more severe, claimed the attacker was a white man wielding an axe. She then made a startling accusation, suggesting that Louis might be a German spy. The discovery of the multilingual letter in their home lent a strange, albeit unlikely, credence to her claim. The police investigated Louis's contacts and activities, but found nothing to support the espionage theory. The local press latched onto the story, interviewing Anna, who spoke openly about her affair with Louis and expressed her dissatisfaction with the police investigation. Her erratic behavior led some to question her mental stability. 2 months after the attack, while undergoing surgery for her extensive injuries, Anna passed away. But just days before her death, she had contacted the police with a final, shocking statement. Her attacker, she claimed, was none other than Louis, her lover, based on this deathbed declaration. The police immediately arrested Louis and charged him with murder. At the preliminary hearing, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, all while vehemently protesting his innocence. Louis appealed the verdict. The appellate court reviewed the facts of the case. They noted that Louis himself was a victim of a brutal assault. He had suffered a severe head wound that, without prompt medical attention, would have certainly been fatal. For Louis to be the killer, the court reasoned, he would have had to attack Anna and then inflict a near-fatal blow upon his own head with an axe. The hypothesis was deemed illogical and highly improbable. Louis was exonerated and set free, with no other leads. The case stalled, becoming another perplexing mystery for the city of New Orleans. 2 months later, the phantom struck for a third time. The victim was another woman named Anna Schneider, 28 years old and 8 months pregnant. It was a sweltering night, and Anna was home alone. Her husband worked late, unable to sleep in the oppressive heat. She was tossing and turning in bed when she heard a strange noise from outside. Before she could investigate, a tall, dark figure burst into her bedroom and struck her hard across the face with a heavy object. She lost consciousness instantly. At 10:05 p.m., her husband returned home to a scene of horror. He found his wife on the floor, her life hanging by a thread. Miraculously, Anna was still alive. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors found a deep laceration on her scalp. Her injuries were serious, but not fatal. The police searched the house. Only $6 in cash was missing. Other valuables were untouched. At the scene, they found a bloodied lamp, believed to be the weapon. And, just like in the previous cases, a panel on the back door had been chiseled away, 2 days after the assault, under the watchful care of her doctors. Anna awoke. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl. When questioned by the police, she could only recall that her attacker was a large, tall man. The other details were lost in the trauma. The attack on a pregnant woman sent a fresh wave of terror through the city. The public was in a panic. They were certain it was the work of the same man, and they gave him a name that would echo in infamy, the Axeman. Just 5 days after the attack on Anna Schneider, the Axeman claimed his fourth victim. The New Orleans Police Department received a frantic call from a young woman reporting an attack on her family. Police raced to the address and found a man in bed with grievous head injuries, but still breathing. He was rushed to receive medical care, but his wounds were too severe. He died shortly after. The victim was identified as Joseph Romano, 31 years old, another Italian grocer. The crime scene told a familiar story. A panel on the back door had been removed. A blood-stained axe was found in the backyard. Nothing had been stolen, besides the victim. 2 other people were in the house at the time: Pauline, the 15-year-old who had made the call, and her younger sister, Mary. They were Joseph's nieces and lived in an adjacent room. Pauline recounted the night's events. She and her sister were awakened by a loud noise. They opened their bedroom door to investigate and saw a tall, imposing man in a dark suit and a fedora standing in the living room. In the dim light, his face was obscured. The man saw them. He hesitated for a moment, a silent, tense standoff, before quickly and quietly exiting the house. Pauline noted that his footsteps were almost silent, as if he were wearing rubber-soled shoes. After the media reported the crime, tips began to flood the police department. One citizen reported finding a bloody axe in their backyard. Another claimed to have seen a man climbing a fence in a neighbor's yard. A third swore they saw a suspicious man hiding under a car. The police diligently followed up on every lead, but each one led nowhere. The axeman was like a ghost, leaving behind only terror and death. A popular theory began to circulate that the killer might suffer from a dissociative identity disorder in his normal state. He could be an ordinary, law-abiding citizen, but at times, a murderous impulse would take over, driving him to commit these horrific acts. This would explain why he was so difficult to find. He was hiding in plain sight. As more time passed, the fear in New Orleans curdled into a constant, low-level dread. The question was no longer if the axeman would strike again, but when and where. The city held its breath. People began to arm themselves, and the sales of firearms and ammunition surged. For 7 months, there was an uneasy peace. No new attacks occurred. A fragile sense of normalcy began to return. People started to hope that the nightmare was over. Then, on the night of Monday, March 10th, 1919, the silence was broken. A grocer named Isidore was relaxing in his home when he was startled by piercing screams from the house across the street. He knew the family who lived there: Charles Cordemelia, his wife Rosie, and their 2-year-old daughter. They were also in the grocery business, fearing the worst. Isidore ran across the street. The front door was locked. He circled to the back and saw the axeman's calling card, a chiseled-out panel on the rear door. From inside, he could hear painful moans. Isidore pushed the door open and entered. Charles, the homeowner, was on the floor, the victim of a brutal assault. His wife, Rosie, had collapsed in the bedroom doorway, clutching their 2-year-old daughter. Both mother and child were covered in blood. Rosie had also sustained a severe head injury. Isidore, horrified, fled the house to summon the police. When help arrived, all 3 victims were transported to the hospital in what seemed like a miracle. Both Charles and Rosie survived their terrible injuries. Their 2-year-old daughter, however, was not so fortunate. She succumbed to her injuries, the axeman's youngest victim. The police processed the scene. As expected, nothing was stolen. A bloodied axe was found in the back hallway. All evidence pointed to the axeman. 2 days later, Charles was released from the hospital. He told police he was attacked by a stranger but couldn't see his face clearly before being struck down. Rosie, however, told a different story. She claimed she remembered the attack vividly and identified her assailants as Isidore, the neighbor who had called for help, and his son, Frank. She was so certain that she signed a sworn affidavit. Charles, in turn, refuted his wife's account, insisting the attacker was a stranger, not Isidore. The police were now faced with a conundrum. Isidore was 69 years old, suffering from arthritis and other ailments. His son, Frank, was 18, a large young man, over 6 feet tall and weighing more than 200 pounds. It seemed physically impossible for Frank to have squeezed through the small hole in the back door. The relationship between the Cortimilius and Isidore was also complex. They were neighbors and, in theory, business rivals. Isidore had previously sued Charles over a commercial dispute, and their relationship had soured, despite the crime's similarities to the other Axeman attacks. Rosie's confident testimony led the police to focus on Isidore and Frank. They were arrested and charged with first-degree murder, based almost entirely on Rosie's eyewitness account. Both men were convicted. Isidore was sentenced to life in prison, and his son, Frank, was sentenced to death. They immediately appealed the verdict. In the aftermath, Charles and Rosie's marriage collapsed under the strain, and they divorced. A year later, Rosie recanted her testimony. She admitted she had falsely accused Isidore and Frank out of jealousy and spite. The true attacker, she confessed, was indeed a stranger. Not long after, Isidore and Frank were exonerated and released from prison. 3 days after the Cortimiglia attack, a letter arrived at the office of the local newspaper, the Times-Picayune. It claimed to be from the Axeman himself. It read, "Hell, March 13, 1919. Esteemed mortal. They have never caught me and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of him whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 o'clock earthly time on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed either in fact or realm of fancy. The Axeman. The publication of the letter threw the city into an unprecedented state of panic. The Axeman, who had been a faceless terror, now had a voice arrogant, mocking, and supernatural. He declared he would spare anyone who played jazz music on the night of March 19th. The police were on high alert, increasing patrols in a desperate hope of catching him. On the night of March 18, 1919, New Orleans transformed. The city, usually alive with music, became a symphony of fear-fueled jazz. Wealthy families hired entire bands to play in their living rooms. The sound of trumpets, clarinets, and trombones spilled out from the windows of mansions and humble homes alike. Those who couldn't afford a band crowded into the city's bars and dance halls, which were packed to overflowing. The music was not joyous, it was a desperate plea for survival, a cacophony meant to ward off a demon. As the clock ticked past 12:15 a.m., a collective sigh of relief swept through the city. The axeman had kept his promise. The night passed without an attack. After this bizarre event, the axeman seemed to vanish. For months, there was no news. The city slowly exhaled, and life began to return to its normal rhythm. But the peace was not to last. On the night of Sunday, August 10th, 1919, a grocer named Steve Boca was awakened by a strange noise. A dark figure was standing by his bed. Before Steve could react, the figure struck him hard on the head. The attacker, startled that Steve was awake, fled, dazed and injured. Steve tried to give chase but collapsed at his neighbor's door. The police found the familiar sign, a chiseled-out panel on the back door. Nothing was stolen, it was the axeman. Back from his hiatus, Steve's head injury was severe, and he could not provide a clear description of his attacker. A month later, a 19-year-old woman named Sarah Lauman was attacked in her home. She suffered devastating head injuries and lost several teeth. By some miracle of medicine and her own will to live, she survived. This time, the back door was intact, but a window had been left wide open. A bloodied axe was found on the lawn. Some investigators began to wonder if this was a copycat, someone imitating the axeman's methods. The final known attack occurred a month after that. At 1 a.m., a woman named Esther was awakened by a loud crash in her home. Esther was married to a man named Mike, and they had 6 children. She ran from her bedroom and saw 2 suspicious men fleeing the house. She then rushed to her husband's room. The scene was one of utter carnage. Mike lay in bed, the victim of a frenzied and brutal assault. Esther ran screaming for the police. Mike had been struck 18 times in the head with a heavy iron bar. He was taken to the hospital but died from his extensive injuries. After this attack, a strange photograph began to circulate, allegedly showing a man in a suit and fedora, holding an axe, entering Mike's home. The photo's authenticity and origin, however, were never confirmed. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the axeman was gone. He never struck again. The reign of terror was over, but the mystery was just beginning. Criminologists have long noted that serial predators like the axeman rarely stop on their own. The abrupt end to his activities suggests he was either incarcerated for another crime, died, or moved away. His true identity remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The theories are numerous and compelling. The most prominent one points to the mafia. Nearly all of the axeman's victims were Italian-American grocers. At the turn of the 20th century, New Orleans saw a massive influx of Italian immigrants, particularly from Sicily. Many of them opened small grocery stores, creating a tight-knit and economically powerful community. However, they also faced discrimination and were often distrustful of the local police. This insular nature made them vulnerable to extortion rackets run by organized crime syndicates like the Black Hand. A precursor to the mafia, it's plausible that the axeman's attacks were not random acts of a madman, but targeted hits against grocers who refused to pay protection money. A prime suspect in this theory was a man named Joseph Mumfree in the axeman's final attack. The victim's wife, Esther, reported seeing 2 intruders after her husband Mike's murder. Esther remarried and moved. Not long after, her new husband mysteriously disappeared. It was rumored that Joseph Mumfree had then appeared at her door, attempting to extort her for money and jewelry, threatening that, if she didn't comply, he would do to her what he had done to her husband. In a dramatic confrontation, Esther allegedly shot and killed Mumfree. She later told police that Mumfree was one of the 2 men she saw the night Mike was murdered. The court ruled her actions as self-defense, and she was released. Mumfree had a long criminal record and was known to lead an extortion gang targeting Italian immigrants. Crucially, His periods of freedom from prison aligned almost perfectly with the Axeman's active periods. When the Axeman was terrorizing the city, Mumfrey was on the streets. When the attacks stopped, Mumfrey was back in prison. While this is compelling circumstantial evidence, it was never definitively proven. The Axeman of New Orleans case officially closed, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a deep, lasting scar on the city's psyche. Was he truly a demon from hell, as his letter claimed, or a cold-blooded killer hiding behind the mask of an ordinary man? Was he a lone psychopath driven by an uncontrollable urge, or an enforcer for the mob, carrying out calculated executions? Or could the Axeman have been more than one person, a group acting in concert? Each theory has its merits and its flaws, making the case all the more mysterious and confounding. He remains a phantom, a boogeyman born from the humid, jazz-filled nights of New Orleans, a testament to the chilling reality that sometimes the deepest darkness resides not in some fiery netherworld, but within the human heart. What are your thoughts on this haunting case? Do you believe the Axeman was a member of the mafia, a lone madman, or something else entirely? Share your theories and feelings in the comments below. We would love to hear what you think. And if you found this exploration into one of history's darkest mysteries compelling, please subscribe to our channel and join us as we uncover more cases in the future. Thank you for listening.